Next at number 10, Wolverine vs. Hulk. This one is wild, okay? We all know Wolverine is ripped, and he gets really ripped in this one. And I don't mean ripped like jacked either, I mean ripped like in half. This one comes from Wolverine vs. Hulk, and it's more than brutal. So in this story, Wolverine is sent to Tibet to assassinate the Hulk. The problem is, he's the Incredible Hulk, so it may sound easier than it looks. So when the battle between these two started up, it's loud, it's messy, and it's going to be pretty violent. Hulk picked Wolverine up and literally broke him into two, tossing his lower half up a mountain and leaving Wolverine's torso bleeding in the snow down below. Just another day in the Ultimates, you know? Being the world's greatest tracker and all, Wolverine smelt his legs that were a few miles up the mountain and then did a really slow, really painful climb to get those smelly feet back where they belong. The series was actually delayed in real life, so this journey up the mountain to get his legs back took 3 years for readers to finally see. Imagine if you had to wait that long to see the next episode after like a Breaking Bad finale or something. 3 years? That's insane. I couldn't do it. And before we head over to number 9, guys, if you wanted to go ahead and give us a thumbs up for this video, that would be great. It helps out the studio a lot. You guys are the best. Thank you so much for watching. Now let's dive back into this list. Number 9, Batman vs. Bane. Directed by, of course, Christopher Nolan, who had done the previous installments, comes a pretty epic conclusion to the Dark Knight trilogy. Released in 2012, The Dark Knight Rises, as you can guess from the title alone, is about Batman rising up. From where? Why? What's going on? Well, how about a broken back thanks to Bane? So this is 8 years after the Joker had a run-in with Gotham City. So now Batman has returned to take down Tom Hardy as he mumbles and frowns aggressively in this film. We get one of my favorite fight scenes from any superhero movie. And what I love about this scene so much is that there's no music to it at all. All you hear is Batman legitimately struggling to try and fight this dude. And it makes it more realistic. It's stressful, and you can see Bruce become more and more exhausted by each punch. And it all comes to a screeching halt when Bane picks up Bruce for one last blow, right to the spinal cord.
Spirit! Oh, your money!
Now, I know people like to give this movie a hard time, but seeing Batman get his ass kicked like this reminds me that it's not always the hero that gets the last punch. Number 8, Magneto vs. Wolverine. Look, I'll be honest, I'm a nail biter, okay? And there's days where I can't even muster up the strength to pull a hangnail out of my own finger or whatever. It sucks. I can't deal with pain, especially when something's coming out of my body, which makes the next one on this list really brutal for me to read. Now, I couldn't imagine if all my bones were suddenly ripped out of my body. That's a nightmare. And that's exactly what happens to Wolverine when Magneto has had enough of his nonsense. Yeah, this all takes place during the Fatal Attractions event. So Wolverine doesn't even have a chance to scream. The adamantium that bonded to his bones erupted outwards like water bursting through a dam. And he's still breathing when this happens. I mean, if this isn't one of the worst things to go through, I couldn't tell you what is. Definitely not one of my hangnails. This one is probably a little bit more painful. Thankfully, Xavier wiped Magneto's memory of the whole event, and Wolverine was out of commission for a while recovering. I mean, he had mental spikes sticking out of his body. I don't think he's gonna get any chores done in the meantime. Number 7, the Avengers vs. Thanos. The Russo brothers came in the MCU with the Winter Soldier, and we got that sick, awesome elevator scene, and then we got Civil War. They make some pretty fun movies. My personal favorite of the bunch is still Infinity War. I mean, all these characters who led their own franchise crammed into one single movie shouldn't have worked out as well as it did. It's a smooth flick. So we see Thanos as he walks his way through the universe collecting the cosmic Infinity Stones. First, he decimates Xandar for the Power Stone, gave Loki the old 1-2 choke for the Space Stone, and then he punched the Hulk so hard in the neck that he quit being the Hulk. And this is like the first 10 minutes of the movie. So the movie itself is a brutal fight, but of course it comes down to the last stone, the last attempt. The Mind Stone. The stone that is Vision. It's in his forehead. So after a last effort attempt of removing the stone in Wakanda, Wanda Maximoff is forced to destroy it. So while she's working on that, all of our Avengers are getting destroyed by the powers that Thanos now obtains, but they don't come out on top in this one. Vision gets that big yellow blackhead pulled right out of his forehead, and then the theater sat silent, and we just watched Vision's lifeless and colorless body fall to the ground. Seeing the Avengers lose like this, especially Vision, was definitely one of the more brutal beatdowns in an MCU movie. Number 6, Knull versus Thor. Spoilers coming in hot for King in Black by Donny Cates, okay, just so you guys are aware. So during the first battle with Knull and his army of symbiotes, Thor was not to be found. The God of Thunder would be a perfect fight considering the weakness of the Horde being electricity and magic. Kind of makes sense. He'd be a pretty reliable chess piece to this violent game, no doubt about it. So when the God of Thunder finally arrived in issue 3 of King in Black, he brought a pretty epic battle with him. So Null had come to Earth with his thousands of symbiote dragons, searching for Eddie Brock's son, Dylan. Searching for you, Dylan, they're coming, man. And when he finally got a hold of Eddie, he stripped him of the symbiote and dropped him from the Empire State Building. Things are looking not so great. And then Thor returns finally in the next issue. So you're a god and a king, Thor asks. Good for you. Now allow me to teach you what those words truly mean. And he does just that. Of course, with the help of Tony riding in on an extremis infected symbiote, it's just another week and a bit and we'll see this epic battle continue with issue 4. But so far, it's up to a crazy, crazy awesome start. Number 5, Spider-Man vs. MORLUN. It's all fun and games until somebody gets poked in the eye. Or maybe if you're Spider-Man, it's all fun and games until you get your eye yanked out. Perhaps one of the worst things I could imagine. In the Spider-Man storyline, The Other, Evolve or Die, we see Spider-Man go toe-to-toe with MORLUN, and he gets his butt kicked. It gets so bad that Spider-Man actually breaks his knuckles while he's trying to fight this dude. That's how intense this battle already is. Things, of course, take a horrible turn for the worse when MORLUN decides to grab Spider-Man's left eye and then yank. No, he didn't, Spider-Man says. Oh, yes, he did. I said out loud on the bus in front of people. Dude, he pulled his eyeball out, and then to make us feel even more sick than we already do, MORLUN proceeds to eat his eyeball, and he even commented on how delicious it was. But if I could ask one question, do the eye colors matter when it comes to like eyeball flavor? Like I got brown eyes, maybe that's like a mapley kind of smoky kind of vibe. I don't know, maybe my eyes are pretty yummy. Somebody ask Army Hammer, see what he thinks about eyes. Number 4, Hulk vs. everybody. Okay, this one's pretty wild. So Thor Ragnarok was loosely based off of the Planet Hulk storyline. And I say loosely because in the comics, well, that story didn't end up going so well. See, on Sakaar, the rocket that he arrived in ended up blowing to smithereens, causing some casualties that left him a little heartbroken, to say the least. So he rolls his shoulders back a few times, and then he heads back to Earth, and thus begins the World War Hulk storyline. He just destroys everybody. I mean, all the heroes that Earth loves at this point, just in the path of this death train. Like he locks the Illuminati in Madison Square Garden, and then he makes them fight to the death. That in itself is brutal. That's crazy. But I mean, I guess if you spend enough time on Sakaar, that just becomes second nature, you know? The whole story is a bloody good mess. I mean, it's great seeing the panic on the Avengers' faces this entire time. It's scary. So make sure if you haven't already to grab all 5 issues of 2007's World War Hulk, because it's a treat. The whole thing's a big battle. Number 3, Spider-Man Close to Home. So when a supervillain escapes, it's not a great time. Usually they're going to come back for the person that put them in there in the first place. So Ultimate Spider-Man's death is absolutely beautiful, and of course it's really, really sad. It's done really well. So after tackling Captain America and literally taking a bullet for him, Peter is left to fight the Green Goblin, Electro, Sandman, Vulture, and Kraven. They are all waiting for him. They all wanted a piece of the spider, and in the end, they got what they wanted. The entire climax happens in Peter's neighborhood, basically. So everybody's running to safety and he's limping around. He's doing his absolute best. He's pulling off fire hydrants and using Electro's current to do some damage to other guys. He's giving it everything he's got. And that's the beauty of this one. He's exhausted from the start. He gets shot before this fight even happens. And you feel it while you're reading it. This is a plot that I think we're gonna finally see in the next Spider-Man movie. I mean, hopefully. With all these villains knowing Peter's true identity now, we could get them all literally showing up at his house, bringing the battle to him. Let's just hope it doesn't end the same way with Peter's heroic death. See, Miles actually saw this whole fight take place, so it actually inspired him to take on the mantle of Spider-Man. So these villains may have won this time, but Miles Morales is coming for you. Number 2, Deadpool kills the Marvel Universe. This issue was released in August 2012, and it is exactly what it sounds like. So what's the story here? Why does Wade want everybody dead? Well, the X-Men put Wade into the Ravencroft Asylum in attempts to heal his insanity, but the doctor wasn't too good at handling a task because the doctor was actually Dr. Psycho Man. So the procedure went well, I'd say. You know, something happened. He brainwashed Wade in hopes to shut down all these inner voices, and well, it worked. Awesome, hooray, there we go. It worked, but the only downside was those voices were now replaced with voices that were encouraging him to kill everybody in the Marvel Universe. And this is a must read. From start to finish, it is brutal, it is graphic, it's an easy one on this list. Number 1, Iron Man vs. Captain America. Seeing two of your friends argue is uncomfortable enough, let alone seeing two of your superhero friends try and kill each other. Captain America Civil War is one of my favorite Marvel movies to watch, because when these guys finally battle it out, there's years of history behind it. Captain America Civil War was released in 2016, directed again by the Russo brothers, and the whole movie is politics. It's superhero politics, like in the comic, minus, most things from the comic, like the school blowing up, for instance. Let's leave that part out of this movie. But in the film adaptation, Tony sides with the government and the Sokovia Accords. He feels responsible for the death of Charles Spencer, or rather with the whole Weekend of Ultron stuff. Steve wants to protect Bucky, and freedom throughout the entire team definitely wouldn't hurt either. So eventually, due to Baron Zemo's sneaky little snake work, he gets Tony in the same room as Steve, and we see footage of a brainwashed Bucky kill Tony's parents. The next 10 minutes are just filled with them both trying to end each other. Tony even blasted Bucky's arm off during this fight. He's going for blood. So Cap decides last minute to stick the shield in Tony's suit, and that shield Tony made very clear didn't belong to Cap, and that it belonged to his father.
Coming in at number 10, Superman versus the Puzzler. There's no doubt that Superman has faced his fair share of hard-fought battles. Villains who actually make him work up a sweat at least, and ones that force him to use some of his more stronger powers. However, when the matchup is so unfair, Superman barely has to even try, and on top of that, he did use some of his lamer powers to defeat the Puzzler. The Puzzler that Superman faced here was the female version named Valerie Van Hoften. For years, she had admired Superman, even wanting to become a hero just like him. However, when she was unable to realize this dream, she turned to a life of crime and was eventually hired to kill the man that she once adored. Valerie has this unique ability to break her body down into puzzle pieces, but remember though, unique doesn't always mean powerful. Sure enough, when these two squared off, Superman just straight up tore her to shreds. I mean, that is her power, but if you're going to break into a billion little pieces, you better make sure that your opponent can't punch people into space. Now, as I mentioned at the start of this point, Superman doesn't even really have to try here. He relies on his lamest power, which is super breath. I mean, come on. If you have a lamer power that Superman has, leave me a comment down below. But just like that, the Puzzler is rendered useless from this breath. A cold breath. And then perhaps what's even more humiliating is that on her second time around, she ended up in a trash can. Yeah, very unfair. Coming in at number 9, Captain Boomerang versus the Flash. This is another one of those fights where you see the villains psyching themselves up for a few pages, but you know that they have absolutely no chance. The Flash, in my opinion, gets overlooked far too often, probably because he isn't exactly a physically intimidating hero, and most of the time the heroes that can punch the hardest usually dominate the fight. But the Flash has superhuman speed, so he could technically kill his enemy before they even have a chance to introduce themselves. That's the delicate balance with the writing in a Flash comic book, and why it's a little bit different from the other ones. They have to walk this fine line between enemies that have the brain of a goldfish and a hero that seems to never remember his strongest power when a fight comes his way. But even so, this fight between Captain Boomerang and the Flash is so ridiculously one-sided. The Flash can outrun bullets, but old Boomerang here, who looks more like a lunch lady, actually thought that he could beat the Flash with a slower projectile that was designed to be returned to him. Then if that wasn't dumb enough, he straps explosives to said boomerangs. Seems like a flawless plan. Would somebody get this guy a Boomerang for Dummies handbook though, because he's gonna blow himself up. Coming in at number 8, Batman vs. Calendar Man. I'm sure that just by hearing the title of this point, you already know how this one's going to go. I'm sorry, but a guy who commits crimes related to the date is just one of the weirdest supervillains, and not very smart considering the fact that Batman is a master detective. What's worse about this villain is that he's literally wearing a costume designed to correlate with the date of the crime that he committed, making it even easier to spot him. Due to this, he has become notoriously known as a joke to both heroes and other villains even. This matchup is so unfair that Batman would probably be better off just letting the Gotham Police Department arrest him on their own. Calendar Man is a successful inventor that is capable of designing machinery required for his various schemes, but put that against billionaire Bruce Wayne and there is no question that Batman is going to come out on top every single time. Coming in at number 7, Thunderpunch versus the Transformers. Now remember when I said that most superheroes are just people that punch really hard? Well, sometimes that isn't enough to cut it. And in the case of Thunderpunch, we feel even worse because his punches would probably be better suited for, I don't know, someone his own size. You see, Thunderpunch was one of the Neo Knights, this super team that was hell-bent on destroying the Transformers. Although, they didn't even try to design any new technology to do this. They just thought punching people really hard would be sufficient. I mean, it's worked out for other people, but not this case. Turns out when your opponent is a 4-story tall robot that can turn into a tank, punching him is just not gonna do the trick. The strangest part about Thunderpunch is the lack of logic when facing an enemy this big. The Transformers could step on him and not even notice. What's worse is the design of his costume, which completely exposes his hands. His body is coated in metal and hard fabric, but he chose to not cover up the one thing that he was hitting a robot with. Real smart. Coming in at number 6, Wolverine versus Magneto. Now this one here is deceiving because Wolverine has held his own against some really tough supervillains, but Magneto is, well, Magneto. During the 90s event called Fatal Attractions though, the X-Men were forced to attack Magneto's new asteroid base. Once there, an intense fight takes place where Professor X and Jean are telepathically attacking Magneto while Wolverine wounds him on the physical plane. This ultimately made Magneto really angry, and what followed was perhaps one of the most horrific comic book panels in X-Men history. Because Wolverine's skeleton is made of adamantium, Magneto could manipulate this just enough to rip the metal out of his body. This left Wolverine completely incapacitated and now with large spikes of metal sticking out of his body. His only savior was the fact that Professor X was able to wipe Magneto's memory before he could finish the job. In at number 5, Daredevil versus the Fantastic Four. Now we must give credit where credit is due. Daredevil certainly put up a valiant effort, but ultimately this was a 4-on-1 bout. The Fantastic Four are among the most powerful heroes in the Marvel Universe, and Daredevil is a blind lawyer. Well, he can also do karate, but he has to be extra crafty when it comes to planning his attacks. In the 1968 comic book The Flames of Battle, Daredevil decided to attack the Four Freedoms Plaza, and I gotta say, he was pretty successful. I mean, he somehow fooled the Human Torch into knocking over a water tower, and then he was able to get Mr. Fantastic to attack the thing by accident. Originally, when Jack Kirby had drawn Daredevil just beating the crap out of the thing, Stan Lee had to step in and say that it made absolutely no sense, which is why we saw Lee writing in a part of the story that sees Daredevil getting Reed Richards to accidentally hit the thing with a nerve blast ray. Although the humor in how weak the Daredevil character is in comparison still resides in those thought bubbles. Right after the thing is blasted, Daredevil stands back and thinks to himself, it wasn't my kick that stopped him. Probably not the best idea to be a superhero with low self-esteem, but there it is. Coming in number 4, Batman versus Guy Gardner. Next up we have the master billionaire detective again against the Green Lantern Guy Gardner. Gardner is wielding one of the most powerful weapons in the universe, but in 1987 this was somehow no match for Batman's money, punches, and cool technology. During the Justice League International number 5, Guy Gardner's lips were flapping as per usual, and so his big mouth got a big punch from Batman. In theory, Gardner should be more than capable of taking out Batman, but due to his extreme arrogance, he removed his power ring right before taking a swing at the Dark Knight. The removal of his ring automatically makes this an unfair fight for Guy Gardner, and in comparison to the big villains Batman has taken down, he makes quick work of Guy in this fight. Coming in at number 3, StarFox versus the Incredible Hulk. During the Incredible Hulk number 300, Bruce Banner is hulking out as per usual, except in doing so, he begins to completely demolish New York City. Now the Hulk is required to be doing this, and yet despite him laying down his big green punches, most of the Marvel squad seems pretty concerned. Now if any fellow hero was deserving of a beatdown for trying to stop the Hulk, it's StarFox. And I have a feeling the rest of the Avengers would agree because he's notoriously one of the creepiest comic book characters of all time. StarFox decides that the way he's going to soothe the Hulk is by using his special ability to emit waves of erotic pleasure. Now I don't claim to be a genius, but I'm fairly certain you can't take down the Hulk with waves of pleasure. Even if you could, how do you expect that to end gracefully? Thankfully the Hulk was able to knock some sense into StarFox and hit him with one of the hardest punches he's probably ever felt in his life. It was an extremely one-sided interaction that definitely made StarFox rethink his approach. Coming in number 2, Dazzler versus Dr. Doom. This one is just sad. Not only does Dazzler lose this fight, but she does so in her own comic book. We're not sure what the writers were thinking when they made Dazzler because her powers are definitely not what one would expect to see from a superhero. Dazzler rocks a shiny outfit with a deep neckline and can convert sound into light, plus she wears roller skates. Well, she can skate really fast. I mean, it seems more like the resume of a DJ, but okay. Somehow the writers find a way to make sense of this hero attacking Dr. Doom, and her big plan is even more sad to watch play out. You see, Dazzler's dazzling plan to kill one of the most powerful supervillains of all time was to just skate at him really fast. That's like an astronaut saying, in order to reach the moon, I will now be climbing the world's largest ladder. Dazzler tries to hit him with her light show after this, but Dr. Doom just ultimately ends up electrocuting the entire room and capturing her until the Fantastic Four can arrive to save her. Coming in at number 1, Spider-Man versus the Sinister Six. Spider-Man is a kid with superpowers that has to experience puberty and bullying all at the same time, so there's no question that he's well versed when it comes to adversity, and supervillains are constantly adding to this pressure for him to remain on his toes at all times. However, even the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man can become overwhelmed from time to time. For example, when Dr. Octopus got the Sinister Six back together, they were fresh out of prison and had a lineup that featured the Hobgoblin and a new Sandman. Safe to say that if it weren't for Doc Ock's own ego and Spidey's superpowered friends, his days could have easily been numbered by the Sinister Six.
Number 10, Squirrel Girl versus Dr. Doom. When Squirrel Girl was new on the scene, she was still weirdly proving how OP of a character she was. Although any fight involving Squirrel Girl you would think would be super unfair in terms of her being completely outmatched. And you'd be right about these fights being unfair, but it's usually more often the other way around, with many of her opponents standing no chance against her. One of her first fights happened to go just like that, featuring the brilliant and dangerous Dr. Doom, who found himself quickly trounced by Squirrel Girl when she attacked him with squirrels, leaving him to be pretty much embarrassed about this fight forever onward. Number 9, Captain America versus the Punisher. This was a very one-sided fight, not only on paper, but also just in terms of how this all went down. Two villains, Goldbug and Plunderer, were willing to join Captain America's side of the fight in Civil War, revealing that even the supervillain community was concerned about what would happen if Iron Man won. They might be villains, but they were people too, and were terrified at the prospect of the nation becoming a police state. Punisher didn't like the idea of working with villains though, and shot down their offer by literally gunning them down. This resulted in a pissed off Cap beginning a brutal fight with Frank, who refused to fight back because, well, Captain America was one of the good guys? So based on how this fight shook out, I don't know if you'd actually be able to tell. Captain America beats the Punisher within an inch of his life over the course of a handful of panels, and also calls him a murderous piece of trash. Wow, that is pretty brutal, Cap. Alright friends, before we move on to this next point, just a quick reminder to give this video a thumbs up if you're enjoying it. It really does help us out here at the channel. Number 8, the Punisher versus Daken. In this fight, Punisher once again is brutally defeated by his opponent, though this time a lot more permanently. Punisher ends up being no match for Daken, who makes quick work of him despite all his guns. I mean, we already knew this was how it was going to end, didn't we? Considering Daken takes after his dad, Logan, and has a pretty intense healing factor. The real impressive thing though is just how much of a beating and stabbing Frank withstands before Daken inevitably takes the victory. In the end, Daken decapitates Frank Castle, killing him, though Frank of course would later come back as the monster Frankencastle and then later be returned to his old self once again. Number 7, Black Canary versus Superman. Pretty much any Injustice fight against Superman is brutal because of how powerful Superman is known for being, and of course how crazed and evil he is here. Black Canary attempts to take down the big bad Superman in Injustice, and at least she came armed with a gun and a kryptonite bullet to do so. Still, this fight ends how you'd expect it to, with Black Canary being no match for the Man of Steel. Well, almost anyways. She successfully shoots him, taking him out momentarily, but he is then chosen as a Yellow Lantern because of his immense ability to instill fear in others, which honestly I agree. Although she may be taken out by Superman's heat vision right after that with a shot straight to the gut, she does still end up getting a different kind of victory through her defeat. A consolation prize at least. She's wearing contacts that have the ability to record everything she sees, allowing people to see just how much of a brutal tyrant Superman has become, because they broadcast it everywhere. Also, I feel like if you actually put in contacts that had cameras in them, even in the future, even if like the technology was amazing, they still have to be pretty thick. Like, I have a hard enough trouble putting regular contacts in my eyes on days when I have to do that. Number 6, HAWKGIRL versus BARBATOS. Granted, this was Nth Metal Enhanced HAWKGIRL, but still, if you had told me this was how Dark Knight's metal was going to go down, I wouldn't have believed you. In the end, HAWKGIRL was the one to defeat BARBATOS in the comic. Though of course, that wouldn't be completely where that story would end, as we saw with the continuation in Dark Knight's Death Metal. However brief the fight between HAWKGIRL and the Bat God was, it was still pretty cool that she was the one who ended up taking him down. Even if it was only because of, well, the Element X blade that she was really able to do this. BARBATOS is basically a god, so on paper this fight in general just sounds pretty crazy. Number 5, the Punisher versus Wolverine, and Spider-Man, and Daredevil. Now you might expect you know how this one should go, but let's also remember that this is Garth Ennis writing Punisher, so yeah. It doesn't really go down the way you'd think. Instead, the Punisher manipulates the 3 heroes briefly into turning against one another when they seek to bring him in. These 3 are hoping to team up to essentially arrest Punisher and then turn him over to the courts and, you know, get him convicted with like the law and all of that stuff, even though Wolverine needs a bit of convincing when it comes to this approach at the beginning. Punisher takes out all three of these heroes, even managing to disable Spider-Man by convincing him that if he moves, bombs will go off. You'd think Spider-Man would actually be able to sense whether or not this was true, but I digress. I guess his spidey sense wasn't working that well that day. Number 4, Superman versus Batman. I mean, you'd think you know how this one should shake out, considering Batman is just a normal human with a bunch of money and, well, years of training. However, in Dark Knight Returns, we get to be pleasantly surprised. A normal man, even when as skilled as Bruce Wayne, you'd think would just be no match for Superman, especially as, well, he's getting on in years here, whereas Kal-El, while also being older, barely looks or seems to have aged at all. But Batman uses all of his strategic skills, knowledge, and his gadgets to help him win this fight. And man, does it go to show that you should never dismiss Batman just because he doesn't have conventional superpowers. Or superpowers at all. Batman has the best superpower, the superpower to know a ton about heroes because he does his homework. Number 3, The Punisher versus Sentry. During Dark Reign, Punisher refuses to stand by and let Norman Osborn become the world's new, biggest, and brightest hero, as S.H.I.E.L.D. is disbanded and Osborn becomes the head of its replacement organization, Hammer, and the new Dark Avengers team. Punisher aims to eliminate Norman Osborn, but standing in his way is the Sentry, who stops the Punisher's bullet mid-air as it soars towards Osborn's head. Sentry sets his sights on Frank, and, well, I think you can imagine how this one goes. Still, at least this fight is gratifying in the sense that it isn't over with like a 1-2 punch. Instead, we actually watch as the Punisher tries everything he can to try to defeat Sentry, knowing it's pretty much all hopeless, but refusing to give up. And he does all this while being brutalized by Robert, who initially just wants to talk it out and arrest Punisher without a fuss. So that's how Punisher is actually able to survive, because Sentry just wants to talk. Punisher's skills and weapons aren't what save him actually at the end of the day. He simply manages to get lucky when Robert doesn't call out his get out of jail attempt at bluffing. Thank goodness. Number 2, Superman versus Alfred Pennyworth. You would think you already know how this fight would shake out, but hey, it didn't go down quite the way most of us would expect when it happened in Injustice. After Superman broke Batman's back with the good old Bane snap over the knee move, he had a brief moment of regret as Batman called him out for being more monster than hero, for torturing him, all while claiming it was for the greater good. As Superman considers what he's just done, he turns to Alfred, who has approached him. However, Alfred didn't approach Superman to, you know, communicate any words of wisdom here or to help Clark come back around and like regain his senses and see the error of his ways. He came to teach Superman a lesson about attacking Bruce. Alfred used a pill which temporarily granted him the same level of strength as Superman, making this super uneven fight on paper a lot more even in reality. Using the element of surprise, Alfred was then able to beat Superman to a pulp while confessing that he was very disappointed at him before scooping up Bruce and taking him to safety. Reminding everyone that even when it comes to facing powerful foes like Superman, Alfred is still and will always be a badass. In case people forgot. Number 1, Squirrel Girl versus Galactus. I freaking love this fight, and I love that I started this list with Squirrel Girl and I'm ending it with her, even though this fight is super ridiculous. You wouldn't think someone like Squirrel Girl, whose powers include communicating with and controlling squirrels and sharp teeth, would be able to take on and even defeat the epic force of Galactus, who is nigh unstoppable and comes armed with the Power Cosmic, which basically allows you to do, well, whatever writers need whoever wields it to do. Power Cosmic, by the way, turns out does help Galactus to communicate in the vacuum of space as well. In the Unbeatable Squirrel Girl issue 4, Squirrel Girl defeats Galactus by realizing that the only way to defeat him is by offering him an alternate planet to devour other than Earth. She and Tippy Toe manage to access the databases in his ship's computers and find one that is covered in nuts, which they manage to convince Galactus are delicious and nutritious, full of calories, life energy. life energy. As strange as this all sounds, the whole issue is pretty great when it comes to writing, so as weird as it sounds that Squirrel Girl was able to beat Galactus, it actually really makes sense in this context.